What if the voice you thought would lead you to comfort instead led you straight into the fire? What if the path God placed before you was not lined with roses, but with thorns that would pierce you again and again? Not as punishment, but as purpose. Not as cruelty, but as calling. What if your heartbreak was not your enemy, but your assignment? This is the question that hovers like a shadow over the life of a man who lived almost 3,000 years ago. A man whose obedience became a prophecy, whose pain became scripture, and whose story still reaches across centuries to confront every human heart. His name was Hosea, and though his world is far removed from ours, the wounds he carried are the wounds every soul eventually knows. It began in a time when kingdoms were trembling, when leaders wore crowns but walked in darkness, when temples were full but hearts were empty, and when people who once worshipped the one true God had filled their lives with idols carved from stone and desires carved from their own rebellion. The land was prosperous but spiritually collapsing. The people were religious but disconnected. Their lips praised God, but their lives betrayed him. And in the middle of this ruin, God chose Hosea, a prophet of quiet strength, a man who lived with integrity, a man who expected his calling to look like the callings of prophets before him: bold words, miracles, judgments delivered from mountaintops. That is what prophets were known for. But Hosea's first assignment did not come like thunder. It came like a wound. Go marry a woman given to unfaithfulness. Not later, not accidentally, not discover her condition after marriage. God said, choose her knowing what she is. Choose her knowing what she will do. Choose her knowing she will break you. Hosea stood in stunned silence. He was a prophet, yet nothing had prepared him for this. There are tests of faith that challenge your courage, but this one would challenge his heart. This would make his life a living message. And every time someone whispered about his marriage behind closed doors, every time he woke up wondering where his wife was, every time he held a child whose name carried judgment, the entire nation was meant to see itself in his story. So Hosea obeyed. He walked through the marketplace with the eyes of the town following him. He found the woman God had chosen, Gomer. Her beauty carried shadows, her smile held secrets. Her past was not hidden. Her reputation moved ahead of her like dust in the wind. Everyone knew who she was. Everyone knew what she did, but God said, choose her. And Hosea did not choose her because she deserved it. He chose her because God asked him to. And so began a marriage built not on mutual trust, but on prophetic purpose. At first, there may have been moments that looked like hope, moments where she stood beside him in silence, moments where she laughed, moments where she looked at him as if wondering why he had come for her, moments where Hosea wondered if perhaps the pain would not be as deep as he feared. But the prophecy in her heart had not yet unfolded. Soon she conceived and bore a son, and as Hosea held the child in his arms, waiting for a name that would mark a blessing, God gave a name that marked judgment. Call him Jezreel. The name carried the memory of bloodshed. It carried a warning for a nation that had trusted its own strength more than God. Every time Hosea called his son, he was reminding Israel that their power would fail, their armies would fall, their pride would collapse. But the pain was only beginning. Gomer conceived again. But this time Hosea did not hear God say, she bore him a child. The distance between them widened. She drifted like smoke, slipping through a closed fist. And when the daughter was born, God gave another name, a name that pierced the heart. Call her Lo Ruhamah, not loved, not shown mercy. This child would grow up hearing a name that echoed the nation's spiritual state. A people who expected God's blessings while giving him nothing in return. A people who believed their rituals covered their rebellion. A people who forgot the hand that fed them, the breath that sustained them, the love that rescued them. Lo Ruhamah was a living sentence, whispered in every corner of the house, unloved, unpitied, uncovered. But even that was not the end. Another child came. The shadows around Gomer grew longer. The nights she did not return home grew more frequent. Her footsteps no longer matched Hosea's, and when the next son was born, God spoke again. Call him Lo Ami, not my people. The covenant bond broken, the relationship severed, the nation's identity erased, and with each child, Hosea felt the weight of the prophecy crushing his chest. Every name a warning, every cry a sermon, every moment a revelation of how deeply betrayal cuts. Still Hosea remained. Still he provided for Gomer. Still he loved children who were perhaps not even his. Still he stayed because God had asked him to live what Israel had done to God. With every act of kindness, he showed her the people were seeing their own story. Israel had taken God's blessings and offered them to idols. Israel had taken God's protection and given credit to foreign nations. Israel had taken God's love and given their hearts to statues that could not breathe. Israel was Gomer, and Hosea was the heart of God, breaking yet pursuing. And then it happened. Gomer left fully. Her absence no longer came in nights, but in seasons. Her footsteps no longer returned home. She disappeared into the arms of other men, men who promised pleasure but offered chains, men who offered gifts but demanded her soul, men who treated her not as a wife but as a possession. The one Hosea loved, the one God told him to choose, fell deeper and deeper into a life that consumed her from the inside. Hosea watched the doorway every night. He waited for footsteps that never came. He listened for a voice that the wind no longer carried. He woke up to an empty place beside him, to children asking where their mother was, to neighbors whispering with pity and mockery. Hosea's heartbreak was public, and yet God said nothing more. He let Hosea feel what he himself felt as Israel walked away. Lover after lover, idol after idol, promise after promise, broken until the covenant lay in pieces. But God was not finished. Israel's rebellion was not the end. Hosea's pain was not purposeless. Gomer's fall was not hopeless. God began to reveal something deeper, a storyline woven inside suffering, not visible to those who only look at the surface. God said, Israel thinks her lovers give her grain and wine and oil, but they come from me. She thinks the world fills her cup, but it is my hand pouring. She thinks idols bless her fields, but it is my rain that falls. She thinks Baal gives her harvest, but it is my sunlight that ripens the fruit. She uses my gifts to worship false gods. She adorns herself for them, wearing the gold I provided, singing the songs I gave her breath to sing, dancing under festivals meant for me, forgetting the one who carried her when she could not walk. So God said, I will strip away the things that blind her. I will take away the gifts she misused. I will let her lovers fail her. I will let her idols betray her. I will let the world she chased collapse around her until she realizes her life was sustained by the one she walked away from. But even this stripping was not revenge. It was rescue. Pain is sometimes the doorway through which truth returns, when all her illusions break, when every false lover abandons her, when every god she trusted turns silent. Then she will remember me. God said, I will lead her into the wilderness where distractions die, the wilderness where idols fall silent, the wilderness where a soul hears the voice it once ignored, the wilderness where God is not competing with noise, where his whisper shakes the heart more than thunder. There in the wilderness, God said, I will speak tenderly to her, not with anger, not with wrath, not with condemnation, but with the voice she forgot, the voice that once pulled her out of Egypt, the voice that once called her daughter, the voice that once carried her through deserts and seas. God planned to restore, not by shouting, but by whispering, not by force, but by love, not by wrath, but by mercy. And he would transform her valley of trouble into a door of hope. The very place she fell would become the place she stood again. The very ground of her shame would become the soil of her redemption. But while God spoke of Israel, Hosea's own story was still unfinished. His marriage remained shattered. His wife remained gone. His heart remained wounded. His bed remained empty. The neighbors looked at him with pity. The children grew without a mother. The prophet walked with grief, shadowing every step. And then, as the nation heard God promising restoration, Hosea received his next instruction, the kind of instruction that breaks a man before it builds him again. Go find her love, her again. Not tolerate her, not accept her, not bring her back out of duty, but love her. Pursue her, show her the love she walked away from. Show her the love she does not deserve. Show her the love that mirrors my love for Israel. And here the story pauses, suspended between pain and pursuit, between judgment and mercy, between what was and what will be. Hosea must rise from his place, step into the streets, walk through the alleys, search through the slave markets. Look for the woman who broke him. Look for the wife who abandoned him. Look for the soul who traded love for chains. His journey has begun, but the ending has not yet been revealed. Hosea stepped out into the streets with a heaviness that could crush even the strongest shoulders. The instruction from God echoed inside him, not as a gentle whisper, but as a command carved into his bones. Go again. Find her. Love her again. The words struck him like a hammer again, because this was not the first time he had loved her, not the first time he had welcomed her, not the first time he had given her what she did not earn. When God said, again, it meant the cycle had happened before. Again meant this was not one moment of weakness, but a pattern again, meant Hosea already knew the pain he was walking toward. And still God said, go. This was not the love of fairy tales. This was the love of covenant, the love of God reflected through a broken man. The town murmured as he walked. Some pitied him, some mocked him. Some whispered that a man should not chase a woman like her. Some said he was a fool for loving someone who chose everyone but him. But Hosea was not walking for pride. He was walking for prophecy. He was walking because every step represented the heart of God, searching for a soul that had wandered so far it no longer remembered home. His sandals pressed into the dirt roads, carrying a weight heavier than grief, carrying revelation. He searched the places respectable men avoided. He passed inns where laughter sounded hollow. He glanced into courtyards where music tried to cover shame. He looked into alleys where debts were paid with brokenness, and he called her name softly at first, then louder, Gomer, but no one answered. He asked the merchants, the travelers, the women carrying water. He asked the men who lingered too long in the shadows. Some shrugged, some smirked, some looked away. His search led him downward each step, taking him deeper into the world she had chosen, a world that devoured beauty, a world that wrapped chains around the soul, a world that took what it wanted until nothing was left. Hosea eventually heard whispers, slave market day of selling those who fell, those who were discarded, those who lost everything were sold. They're traded like objects, auctioned like cattle, and something inside him sank. A quiet dread settled in his stomach because he knew the direction of her fall. He knew what would happen to a woman who gave herself to men, who demanded more than she could offer. A woman whose lovers eventually tired of her, whose beauty faded under the weight of sin, whose worth was decided by those who used her and then abandoned her, and he feared she had reached the bottom of her collapse. He turned toward the market. The closer he came, the heavier the air felt. The sounds were harsh, the cries sharp, the bargaining loud. The rusted clink of chains echoed like broken music. People gathered around. The crowd parted just enough for him to walk through. He did not look at the faces of the buyers. He looked at the platform at the center, and then he saw her. Gomer stood there. She did not look like the woman he once married. Her hair hung in tangled strands. Her clothes were torn, her wrists bound, her eyes hollow. The spark she once carried had been extinguished by nights of use and days of hunger. Her shoulders shook, not from cold, but from shame. The crowd's eyes crawled over her like insects, whispering, judging, appraising. What was once her charm was now her humiliation. She had nothing left, not dignity, not value, not identity, just emptiness. And the price written by those who owned her. Hosea felt his heart break again, but he also felt something deeper rise within him. Love, not weak or fragile, but fierce. The kind of love that moves mountains. The kind of love that defies logic. The kind of love that mirrors the heart of God. This was the woman who betrayed him, who walked away, who spent herself on others, who left her marriage in ruins. And yet standing before her, Hosea saw not her stains, but her soul, not her shame, but her need, not her past, but her possibility. And God whispered again, "Love her. This is how I love my people." The auction began, the bidding started low, then rose as the buyers laughed and speculated. But before the value could climb further, a voice cut through the crowd. Hosea stepped forward and offered a price that silenced everyone. 15 pieces of silver and a measure of barley. A price that reflected both redemption and humiliation. A price that said she was worth saving, but also showed how far she had fallen. He did not bargain. He did not hesitate. He paid fully, completely, willingly. He bought back what was already his. He redeemed what had been lost. He purchased the freedom of the woman who had thrown her freedom away. And in that moment, the entire marketplace became a living prophecy, a picture of God buying back his people with a cost they could never repay. Hosea approached the platform. The guards released her, and she stumbled forward, unable to look at him. Her eyes remained fixed on the dirt, as if she did not deserve to meet his gaze. Shame wrapped around her like a cloak, heavier than chains. Hosea reached out gently, lifting her chin until her eyes met his. She expected anger. She expected judgment. She expected coldness. What she found was mercy. His voice was low, steady, filled not with bitterness, but with truth. "You will stay with me. You will not go after other lovers. You will be mine, and I will be yours." His words were not commands of control, but invitations to restoration. He was rebuilding the covenant she had shattered, not with force, but with love. Not with threats, but with redemption. Gomer could barely breathe. She had expected to die in slavery. She had expected to fade into darkness. She had expected to become another forgotten soul, sold and resold until her life disappeared. But Hosea said, "Live with me not die with me, not suffer with me, live with me. He took her hand, guiding her away from the platform, through the crowd, through the streets, back toward the home she once abandoned. The walk was quiet. She did not speak. He did not force her to speak. The journey itself was an act of healing, a slow returning to the place she once treated carelessly. Every step was a step away from shame and a step toward redemption. The townspeople watched stunned. Some sneered in disbelief. Some shook their heads. Some whispered that Hosea was a fool, but Hosea knew what they did not. This moment was not about his pride. It was about God's message. Israel was Gomer. God was Hosea. The marketplace was the world. The price was mercy. The redemption was undeserved, and the love was relentless. Every eye that judged Hosea was seeing their own story reflected back at them. Every tongue that mocked his forgiveness was tasting the bitterness of a truth they refused to accept, that they too had been unfaithful, that they too had sold themselves, that they too had chased false gods, that they too needed a redemption they could not afford. When Hosea and Gomer reached home, the children watched cautiously. Lo Ruhamah peeked around the corner, unsure whether to run toward her mother or hide. Lo Ami clung to Hosea's tunic, unable to understand what was happening. Jezreel stood silently torn between love and confusion. And Gomer, she fell to her knees. Tears she had buried for years finally broke free. Hosea knelt beside her, not to scold, but to lift her, not to punish, but to restore, not to remind her of her failures, but to show her she still had a future. She whispered, "I am not worthy." He replied softly, "None of us are. Yet God loves us still." As days passed, Gomer adjusted slowly. The habits of her old life tugged at her. The shadows whispered to her. The cravings of rebellion tried to reclaim her. But Hosea was patient. He did not demand instant perfection. He offered steady presence, gentle guidance, unwavering love, the kind of love that heals, the kind of love that rewrites identity, the kind of love that restores what shame has stolen. She learned to sleep again without fear. She learned to breathe again without guilt. She learned to look in the mirror without seeing only failure. She learned to hold her children without trembling, and slowly, she learned to love Hosea the way she had never known how to love anyone. Meanwhile, the prophetic message deepened. God spoke to Hosea, revealing that Israel was on a similar path. They had wandered too far, chased too many idols, trusted too many nations, offered their worship to too many gods. They had sold themselves to pleasures, to pride, to greed, to power. And the world they trusted would soon sell them as cheaply as Gomer had been sold. But just as Hosea redeemed Gomer, God said, "I will redeem my people." Even after all their rebellion, all their betrayal, all their broken promises, I will not forsake them. I will buy them back with love and mercy. I will pay a price no one understands. I will pursue them into their captivity. I will break their chains. I will bring them home. The parallel between Hosea and Israel became clearer with each passing day. Every tear Gomer cried was a reflection of Israel's spiritual condition. Every act of patience from Hosea was a glimpse of divine compassion. Every moment of restoration was an echo of what God intended for his nation. Hosea began to understand that his marriage, his heartbreak, his redemption was not a private suffering, but a cosmic sermon written in flesh and blood. And as he looked at Gomer, he no longer saw just a broken woman. He saw humanity. He saw the human soul wandering away from its maker, seeking love in all the wrong places, selling itself to fleeting desires. ending up enslaved to what promised freedom. And then he saw God, who pursues, who rescues, who pays the price, who restores what everyone else has given up on. As Gomorrah healed Hosea, healed as their home filled with forgiveness, the prophecy filled with promise, and the shadow hanging over Israel held both judgment and hope, collapse and restoration, exile and return. The story was not finished. The redemption had begun, but the revelation was still unfolding, and Hosea stood at the center of it, not just as a prophet, but as a living picture of divine love. But the message did not end here. Gomer's return was only the beginning. The warnings grew louder, the visions grew stronger, the fate of nations trembled in the balance. The voice of God pressed deeper into Hosea's spirit, telling him things the people were not ready to hear: the collapse of kingdoms, the scattering of tribes, the exile of a nation, the grief of a God who loves his people too fiercely to let them destroy themselves, and yet woven through every prophecy was the same unbreakable truth. The love that redeemed Gomer would one day redeem all of Israel, and the love that redeemed Israel would one day reach every soul, every nation, every heart that ever wandered from God. The prophecy was far from complete. The story was far from finished. The redemption was only beginning, and the clock was ticking. The days following Gomer's return felt like a fragile dawn, a slow rising of light after a night that lasted too long. The house breathed differently now, not as a place of confusion or abandonment, but as a place where wounds were learning to close. Though the echoes of old memories still lingered, though shame still tried to whisper through the cracks in her mind, a new atmosphere settled around the family, one created by Hosea's steadfastness and by the unseen presence of the one whose love he reflected. Gomer woke each morning uncertain at first. She would touch her wrist, remembering the roughness of chains, then realize she was free. She would open her eyes, expecting to see strangers, then find her children beside her. She would brace herself for harshness, or conditions, or judgment, only to hear Hosea ask gently if she had slept well. The kindness confused her. It disarmed her. It reached places in her heart she had locked long ago, and slowly she began to trust what she could not yet explain. The love she had run from was real. The love she had betrayed had not died. The love she did not deserve was rebuilding her life, brick by brick, breath by breath, day by day. Hosea watched her transformation with quiet patience. He did not expect quick change. He did not demand instant purity. He knew healing comes in layers, like peeling away the lies she had believed about herself, lies spoken by men who used her, lies whispered by the world, lies planted by her past. She walked slowly, but she walked forward, and Hosea thanked God for each small step. The children slowly adjusted. Jezreel stood taller now. He had lived through the tension of seeing his mother leave and return. He did not understand the full prophecy hidden in his name, but he felt its weight when he saw Hosea's devotion, when he saw Gomer's tears, when he saw the family being restored. Something inside him sensed that their story was bigger than their house. Lo Ruhamah softened. She approached her mother carefully, testing the boundaries before opening her heart again. And when Gomer held her daughter close, the name not loved felt like a lie melting in her arms. And little Lo Ami looked at his mother as if he had always known she would come home, as if he had never doubted she belonged to them. And Hosea saw in their faces the deeper message God was writing. The names of judgment were slowly becoming names of mercy, just as God had promised for Israel. Yet even as the home healed, the nation drifted further from God. The altars to Baal multiplied. The sacrifices grew louder, not holier. The people worshipped idols with passion, while offering God empty rituals. Their hearts were divided, their loyalty shallow, their devotion selective. The land itself seemed to groan, as if aware that something catastrophic was approaching, but the people ignored the tremors in the spiritual ground beneath them. They believed prosperity meant approval. They believed abundance meant blessing. They believed comfort meant God was pleased, and God spoke to Hosea again, words heavy as thunder, yet tender as tears. Tell them their prosperity is temporary. Tell them their idols will fail. Tell them their alliances will betray them. Tell them the day is coming when they will reap what they have sown. Hosea listened, his soul trembling. He delivered the words faithfully, even when no one wanted to hear them. Some laughed, some scoffed, some accused him of fear-mongering. Some called him old-fashioned. Some said, judgment made no sense in a world so full of blessings. But Hosea knew the blessings were borrowed. They were gifts that Israel credited to idols. They were miracles Israel no longer recognized. They were signs of a God who withheld punishment, not because his people were faithful, but because his love was patient. The more Hosea spoke, the more anger rose in the hearts of leaders. They did not want a prophet disturbing the false peace they had built. They wanted comfort, not conviction. They wanted religion, not repentance. They wanted a God who smiled but never confronted. And Hosea saw in their resistance the same pattern Gomer once walked: the desire for pleasure over truth, the hunger for validation over transformation, the lure of temporary satisfaction over eternal relationship. And his heart broke again, because he realized the nation was falling in slow motion, and only God's mercy could catch them. One night after the children had gone to sleep, Gomer sat beside Hosea, the silence between them warm and familiar. She looked at him with eyes no longer clouded with fear. She asked softly, "Why did you come for me?" Hosea turned his gaze toward her slowly. "Because your loss was not your end. Because the love God gave me for you was not fragile. Because your unfaithfulness could not stop my covenant. Because mercy is stronger than the chains that held you." She listened, tears forming. You did not have to come, but I did, because God came for me when I ran from him, and I could not do for you what I refuse to believe he can do for all of us. She rested her head against his shoulder, realizing that his love was not a man's strength, but a reflection of divine compassion. But even while Hosea's household was restoring, the rest of the land continued drifting. The warnings God gave grew darker, sharper, clearer. The nations surrounding Israel prepared for war. The political alliances Israel trusted were collapsing. The kings who sat on thrones built on pride and bloodshed were failing one after another. Corruption filled the palace. Corruption filled the temple. Corruption filled the hearts of the people. And Hosea stood as a lone voice, crying out in a storm that no one believed was real. God spoke again. Israel is like a vine that produces fruit only for itself. They have multiplied altars for sin, not worship. They swear by my name, but their hearts belong to idols. They claim to know me, but their lives deny me. And Hosea delivered each word, feeling the weight of divine sorrow. He was not shouting from anger. He was weeping from truth. He was pleading with a nation that had forgotten its maker, forgotten its covenant, forgotten its deliverance, forgotten its identity, forgotten its purpose, forgotten its first love. One morning, as the first glow of sunrise touched the horizon, Hosea went outside and saw something that struck him deeply. A group of men, were offering sacrifices at an altar nearby, but they were laughing, joking, gossiping, not reverent, not repentant. Their worship was empty, sounding holy, but rooted in convenience. He heard their laughter mingled with the smoke of offerings, and realized that Israel was not spiritually dead, but spiritually deceived. They thought their outward rituals could save them. They thought their ceremonies could hide their corruption. They thought God would accept their sacrifices while ignoring their hearts. And God whispered to Hosea, "I desire mercy, not sacrifice. I want knowledge of God, not burnt offerings. I want hearts, not ceremonies. I want devotion, not performance. I want love, not empty worship." Hosea carried these words like fire in his chest. He walked back inside, looked at Gomer, and realized how clearly her life mirrored Israel's story. She once offered pieces of herself to men who never loved her, believing they were her providers, believing they were her protectors, believing they were her future, until everything collapsed, and she realized only Hosea had cared. Only Hosea had given without demanding. Only Hosea had remained when everyone else left, and Israel too would discover that every idol, every alliance, every substitute god, every false lover would abandon them until they had nothing left. But the God who had loved them from the beginning, Hosea, began to speak these revelations publicly, telling Israel they were sowing the wind and would reap the whirlwind, telling them their altars brought them no safety, telling them their kings were corrupt, telling them their priests misled the people, telling them judgment approached like a storm on the horizon. Yet even in judgment, Hosea spoke hope. God will heal their unfaithfulness. God will love them freely. God will restore them. God will return them to their land. God will renew the covenant. God will plant them again. God will call them his people again. These words confused the crowds. How can God judge us and restore us? How can he break us and heal us? How can he scatter us and gather us? How can he reject us and call us his own? Because his love is not like human love. And Hosea pointed to his own marriage as the answer. When Gomer betrayed me, I pursued her. When she ran, I found her. When she fell, I lifted her. When she sold herself, I bought her back. When she lost herself, I reminded her of who she was. Love does not abandon. Love redeems. And God's love is greater than mine. But even as hope intertwined with warning, the visions Hosea received became more intense. God showed him nations rising like wolves, Assyria sharpening its claws, Babylon watching from a distance, armies ready to sweep across the land. He saw temples burning, cities collapsing, people scattered like dust carried by the wind. He saw the beauty of the land stripped away. He saw mothers weeping for lost children. He saw priests with garments torn. He saw kings running for their lives. He saw Israel shattered, and he wept because the pain was not just prophecy. It was personal. It was his nation. It was his people. It was his story. It was Gomer's fall, mirrored in a nation's fall. But even in his tears, he heard God whisper, "When they fall, I will rise for them. When they cry, I will answer. When they are lost, I will find them. When they repent, I will embrace them. When the valley is deep, I will be their hope." Gomer began to sense the heaviness pressing on Hosea one evening when he sat long after sunset staring at the dim glow of the oil lamp. She approached carefully, asking, "Are you hurting?" He nodded quietly. "The nation is collapsing, and they don't even see it coming." She placed her hand over his. It was gentle, unsure, but sincere. She whispered, "You did not give up on me. God will not give up on them." Hosea looked at her, startled by the truth coming from the woman whose life was once the very picture of Israel's unfaithfulness. She continued softly, "I was blind, and you still loved me. They are blind, and God still loves them. Sometimes we do not see the pit until we are already inside. But even then, someone can still pull us out." Her words echoed inside Hosea like a prophecy spoken unknowingly, the redeemed woman speaking to the prophet with the insight born from her own ashes. She had lived judgment. She had lived exile. She had lived chains. She had lived redemption. She understood the heart of God, not from study, but from experience. And Hosea realized her restoration was itself a message for the nation. If God can heal her, God can heal Israel. If she can return, Israel can return. If her name can change, their destiny can change. The days turned into months, and Israel's rebellion grew louder. Their idols multiplied. Their arrogance deepened. Their leaders hardened. Their pride thickened, and the shadow of foreign empires grew taller behind their mountains. The storm approached the land even as people danced under cloudless skies, unaware that the sky was preparing to break. And in the midst of this rising tension, God spoke again to Hosea, words that felt like a trembling in the earth itself. "Tell them the shaking is near. Tell them the roar will come. Tell them the foundations will crack. Tell them to return before the fall becomes final." Hosea stood at a crossroads, his heart torn between the tenderness he carried at home and the burden he carried for a nation, his voice trembling from the heaviness of divine sorrow. Yet he remained faithful, and the prophecy continued, unraveling, weaving judgment and redemption into a single, unbreakable thread. The clock kept ticking, the storm kept forming, and the revelation was far from finished. The night before the prophecy reached its breaking point, Hosea felt an uneasiness that pressed against his chest like an invisible weight. The air outside was still, but his spirit trembled as if something in the unseen realm was shifting, something vast, something irreversible, something that had been approaching slowly for years, now stood at the threshold, ready to enter. The stars above him looked distant, muted, as though even the heavens were bracing for what would unfold. Inside the house, Gomer slept peacefully curled beside their children, unaware of the storm forming in the heart of the prophet. Hosea stepped outside, letting the cool wind brush against his face. He looked toward the horizon, the same horizon he had watched since he was a child, but tonight it felt different, heavy, thick, with a silence that spoke louder than thunder. His heart whispered a prayer, not for himself, not for his family, but for his nation, a nation unaware of the cliff beneath their feet, unaware that their choices had woven a net of consequences that now tightened around them. As he stood there, God spoke again, but not with the tenderness he used when restoring Gomer. This time, his voice carried the weight of centuries of patience and centuries of betrayal. "Hosea, my people are destroyed. For lack of knowledge, they have rejected the truth. They have traded their glory for idols. They have forgotten their Maker. They have sown corruption, and they will reap sorrow. They have planted pride, and will harvest collapse." Hosea bowed his head, filled with sorrow, because he knew the words were true. He had walked through the marketplaces, seen the altars, smelled the offerings, heard the chants, witnessed the foreign gods carried proudly in the streets. He had watched the priests grow greedy, the kings grow arrogant, the people grow numb. They lived as though God were a relic, not their lifeline. They lived as though blessings were natural, not divine. They lived as though sin were harmless, not deadly. They lived as though time were endless, not running out. The next morning, Hosea rose before the sun and walked through the town. His eyes saw the ordinary movements of life, merchants opening their stalls, children playing, women gathering water. But his spirit heard something else, a ticking, a countdown, the echo of a destiny approaching slowly and steadily. He stopped near the city gate, where travelers passed through, where soldiers stood guard, where elders sat exchanging stories. And there he spoke, not with the voice of a man, but with the voice of a prophet. Israel, return to your God, for your iniquity is heavy like chains upon your soul. Turn back before the harvest of judgment comes. The people stared, some confused, some irritated, some amused. They had heard prophets before. They had learned to dismiss warnings. They believed their sacrifices protected them. They believed their rituals made them righteous. They believed God would never allow disaster to touch them. And so they brushed aside Hosea's cries as though he were only a man speaking out of emotion, not a prophet. Delivering the heartbeat of God, Hosea walked further into the town and saw a group of leaders gathered near the palace gate, their robes rich, their expressions proud. They discussed alliances with foreign nations. They debated taxes. They laughed at the idea of weakness. Hosea approached them like a shadow and spoke, Israel leans on broken reeds, trusting nations that cannot save, seeking safety in the world while ignoring the God who built their walls. You think your armies will defend you, but they are dust. You think your kings will protect you, but they are blind. You think your idols will bless you, but they are nothing but stone. The leaders glared at him, their pride pierced by truth. They muttered that he was unsettling the nation, threatening morale, weakening unity. But Hosea did not back down, because prophets do not speak to be liked. They speak because truth burns in them like fire. Later that day, he returned home exhausted. Gomer saw the heaviness in his steps. She approached him quietly, her eyes full of understanding. She had once been the symbol of Israel's rebellion. Now she was the symbol of its redemption. She touched his arm and whispered softly, "Is it time?" Hosea looked at her with grief. Yes, the storm is no longer far. It is here. Gomer sat beside him, the memories of her own collapse rising within her. She understood destruction because she had lived it. She understood restoration because she had tasted it. And she knew the nation would have to walk through the same valley, learning what she had learned the hardest way, that idols do not save, that sin does not satisfy, that running does not lead to freedom, that rebellion does not birth identity, she whispered. Then God will restore them too. Hosea closed his eyes. Yes, but only after the fall that evening, the sky over Israel began to change. Clouds gathered not with rain, but with a heaviness that carried the scent of coming war. The wind shifted, carrying with it the distant sound of marching soldiers from a land far away. The same Assyria Hosea had warned them about, a nation they underestimated, a nation they thought distant. But now, its footsteps echoed like drums in the bones of the land. Hosea stepped outside as dust rose along the horizon, marking the approach of an empire. A chill ran through him, because he saw not just soldiers, but prophecy stepping into reality. The warnings he had spoken were no longer words. They were becoming flesh, becoming swords, becoming fire. And yet, amid the fear, God spoke again. Hosea, after they fall, I will call them again. I will heal their waywardness. I will bind their wounds. I will gather them like a mother gathers her child. I will plant them again like a tree beside water, I will revive them after the winter. I will speak to them again in the wilderness, and they will listen this time. Hosea felt tears slide down his face. Judgment and mercy intertwined like twin rivers flowing from the same heart. He gathered his family inside the children, sensing something in the air, something they could not name, but could feel like the trembling of the earth before an earthquake. Jezreel looked out the window, his young face serious. Lo Ruhamah clung to Gomer's dress. Lo Ammi climbed into Hosea's lap and asked, "Father, is something coming?" Hosea held him close. Yes, something is coming, but so is God. Night fell heavy and deep. The distant sound of armies grew louder. Torches flickered on the hillside. Voices carried in the wind. Israel continued their feasts, unaware or unwilling to see the danger pressing at their borders. They believed they were safe because they lived in the promised land, but they forgot that the promise is not a shield without obedience. The first clash of metal rang out like a cry from the earth. Soldiers cried, horses roared, fires ignited. The sky lit up with flashes, not of lightning, but of war. Hosea stepped outside as chaos began to ripple through the town. People screamed, soldiers ran, leaders panicked, altars crumbled, idols fell from their pedestals. A lifetime of false security burned in moments, and yet Hosea did not run. He stood in the midst of collapse like a lone anchor in a raging sea. His heart broke for his nation, but he knew this was not destruction for the sake of destruction. It was surgery. It was God cutting away infection. It was cleansing. It was the fall that would one day prepare for rising. Gomer found him outside, her eyes filled with the reflection of flames. She asked, trembling, "Is this the end?" Hosea shook his head gently. "No. This is the breaking before the healing. This is the scattering before the gathering. This is the tearing before the mending. This is judgment, but not abandonment. This is pain, but not rejection. This is the cry that will lead them back to the one they tried to forget." As night turned to dawn, the smoke of battle hung like a shroud over the land. Israel had fallen, their pride shattered, their idols useless, their kings powerless, their people taken captive, their land desolate. The covenant seemed broken beyond repair, but Hosea heard the whisper of the one who never breaks his promises in the silence after the storm. God spoke again. "Hosea, tell them when they return, I will heal them. When they seek me, I will answer. When they cry out, I will run to them. When they confess, I will forgive them. When they come home, I will embrace them like a father embracing his lost child. Tell them, I will raise them from the ashes. Tell them, I will breathe on their dry bones. Tell them, I will restore their vineyards. Tell them, I will make them flourish again. Tell them, I will call them my people again. Tell them, I will call them loved again. Tell them their wilderness will bloom. Tell them their sorrow will become joy. Tell them their exile will end. Tell them I will betroth them to me forever in righteousness, in justice, in compassion, and in love." Hosea felt renewed strength coursing through him, not because the land was healed, but because the promise was alive. He walked through the ruins of the city, speaking hope to the few who remained, telling them God had not abandoned them, telling them the fall was not final, telling them a dawn would come even after the darkest night. And as he spoke, Gomer stood beside him, no longer the symbol of betrayal, but the living proof of redemption. Her story had become Israel's story. Her healing had become Israel's future. Her home had become a prophecy in motion. She looked at the people, broken, frightened, scattered, and whispered words that echoed like a quiet miracle. "You can return. You can heal. You can belong again." Hosea placed his hand over hers, and nodded, yes, because love still pursues, because mercy still calls, because God is not finished. The prophecy reached its conclusion, not with destruction, but with a promise that the same God who allowed Israel to fall would be the God who lifted them up again. The same God who scattered them like seeds would plant them again in fertile soil. The same God who declared, "Not my people," would one day declare, "You are my people." The same God who watched them run would one day run toward them. And Hosea understood at last that the entire story, his marriage, his heartbreak, his redemption, the names of his children, the fall of a nation, the promise of restoration, was all pointing to a greater truth, a truth that echoes across centuries, a truth for every soul that wanders, a truth for every heart that breaks, a truth for every life that feels too lost to be found. God pursues even when we run. God loves even when we betray God, redeems even when we destroy ourselves. God restores even when everything seems beyond repair. God calls us back from the wilderness, from the ruins, from the ashes, from the chains, and says, "You are mine, and I am yours." And the clock, the prophecy, the story all falls silent, leaving one final question standing before every soul. Will you return?